Cayman. Get prepared for election 2025. CMR, your election headquarters, is ready to keep you informed with candidate features, debates, analysis, interviews, and honing in on the issues that matter the most. Don't miss a beat. Keep it locked to Cayman Marl Road for your complete election coverage.
All right, folks, we're here with a part 2 interview with candidate for West Bay North, Mr. Rolston Anglin. He likes to give his full name. And we have, if you saw part 1, it was very, very informative, very, very interesting, where we essentially went through the different aspects of Rolston's 10 years education minister, and quite an extensive list, I must say, of things that he was able with his team of civil servants and the ministry to accomplish over the 4 years. But before we get back into continuing this specific conversation, Rolston, I wanted to get some preliminary questions out of the way. So there are people in the community who continue to have burning questions for you. And as you well know, here in CMR, we don't shy away from the tough questions. And I certainly appreciate that you've addressed some of these already. But, let's do a bit of a quick fire.
Sure.
And we can address them, hopefully, for the final time. But in any event,
we can only hope, Sandra.
Yeah. So the first one that came in from the last time people viewed your show episode was, what is your current relationship with alcohol?
Sandra, I am not going to shy away from the mistakes I've made in the past. Mm-hmm. But those mistakes are just that, in the past and in the rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. I do not have any abuse of alcohol issues whatsoever. I am a responsible father and a responsible member of our community. Mm-hmm. Those mistakes I made in the past are just that, mistakes in the past that I've apologized to my family, to this community for, and I own them because it was me. I didn't try to hide them. I didn't try to run away. But at the end of the day, I do not have any abusive relationship with alcohol whatsoever. And I am now focused on being the best possible version of myself and being able to get back to what is really my passion, representing the good people of these islands, in particular West Bay North, and putting my all into being a part of the solutions going forward. Because we need sound-minded, responsible, mature individuals who are going to help put together the next administration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, question number 2. Is he preparing to align again with his former UDP colleagues?
No, I'm not. At this stage in my life, I have made it very, very clear, not just to the public, but I've had conversations with a number of individuals, direct, man-to-man conversations, which was very, very simple. I've taken the decision to run by myself, principally for, I'm going to say 3 reasons, Sandra. Mm-hmm. One is, I didn't think that I should enter into some marriage of convenience, as it were, with any political party at this very late stage. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm best placed to be able to be a part of our solutions going forward by running an independent campaign. Mm-hmm. Now, I am fully on board with how the public feels and the public sentiment, which is that we would not want Cayman to have an independent-led administration. Mm-hmm. If people look at my history in my former party, they will see that not only was I a founding member and worked my way up to becoming a minister, but I understand the role that you have to play in being a part of a team, being professional, and ensuring that you are positively impacting that team or party. I have had a number of discussions with various parties who are actually going to be contesting this election. I've made it very clear to them my position that I'm running independent. And once the elections are over, I am going to look at what is going to be in the best interest of the Cayman Islands. Which party is going to offer these islands the best way forward, and join them. And I have been told by at least 3 differing groups, parties, whatever you want to call them, that should I be successful, they'll be happy to have me be a part of their team. Now, my process for that, Sandra, is going to be that I am going to go back to the people of West Bay North and ensure that they understand what I'm doing. I'm not just going to jump up on some interview and say, here is what I'm doing. But people are trusting my judgment. And my judgment on this is a political judgment. And I am confident that people trust me in that vein, because that's why they would have voted for me. And Sandra, this exact explanation is what I've said to people on the ground as I've been canvassing. And people have been perfectly happy with that explanation because they know me. And they know that I've been part of a team, and they appreciate the peculiar circumstances that I find myself in. But let me be very, very clear. I am not running with any of my former UDP colleagues. I'm not running with McKeeva Bush. I am not running with anyone else that was associated with the United Democratic Party. I am running a true independent campaign to be elected, to then move forward as part of the solution with what is I see as the best possible options. Because Sandra, let's take another step back. At this stage, the Community Party has, I think, 7 members, but 7 candidates can't form 10.
Right.
I don't think, let's take a look at the Progressives. Thus far, I think they've unveiled about 5 or 6 candidates. We hear about these other parties that are going to come forward. I don't believe there's anyone that believes in Cayman that any one party is going to secure a mandate, i.e. get 10 people elected.
Right.
So if we all agree that that's not going to be the case, then persons like myself who are running an independent campaign, who have proven that I can work within the party/team concept, would feel comfortable that I would be able to be a productive member of any administration going forward. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing, Sandra.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still a lot to be determined on that front as well, in the sense that, obviously other candidates might be added to the sort of contingency for these various parties that are being formulated. So I think that that's, a fair point to make because there's still some unknown elements.
Sure.
There for sure.
Sure.
All right. Let's continue to move on. How does Rolston feel about a sex registry being issued in Cayman? So this would be a sex offenders registry, which is something I've personally advocated for probably 20 years by now.
Sandra, there is nothing we can do more in life than to protect women, children, and anyone from sexual predators. I would be in 110% supportive. It is a must. We have to protect all of our citizens, but in particular, most vulnerable, which are children and women. And Sandra, on that point, when I was a backbencher, I remember in my first term in the House, I seconded a very, very important motion that moved sexual offenses from the back ages. Can you imagine, Sandra, in 2000 when I got elected, our legislation still said that if there was sexual, if you took advantage sexually of a quote-unquote idiot. Now that's not my words. Those are the words that were used. That was what was used in our legislation. And so we moved a motion and worked diligently with the then Attorney General's office and got that to the House, where we removed that type of offensive language and we actually increased the sentencing options as it relates to sexual offenses. Now, Sandra, not only would I be in favor of a sex registry, a sex offenders registry, I would also be in favor of mandatory minimum sentences for sexual abuse. To me, if you take advantage of a minor, this should not be left purely to the discretion of the judges. We should have a mandatory minimum sentence that you should be, that should be on your case You can't have children's lives being destroyed. Because let's face it, that's essentially what happens to a lot of people. They never trust again. They very, very rarely have good relationships, or very often they don't. Let me say very, very rarely, but very often they don't have good, positive relationships into their adulthood because of those early experiences of being taken advantage of. And so for me, if a person takes away the innocence of a child or attacks and rapes a woman, there should be mandatory minimum sentences in place. And so that is something that I certainly am going to be supporting and championing in the next time I'm elected to office.
Very good. Next question: as the father of daughters, who what are his thoughts on sexual harassment and the behavior of certain MPs?
I believe that when it comes to sexual harassment, MP or not, we have to not only support the legislative framework and changes that I understand are afoot, but we have to have an environment from school age right up to the workplace, that all of our places are free from harassment. We also need to ensure that, and you're going to see this in my manifesto as it relates to some of the changes that I'm proposing to the immigration regime, people who come here are told and made to go through mandatory programs before a work permit is issued as to the social norms of Cayman. This business of whistling and hollering at women on the streets and all these sorts of things that other nationalities are bringing here is simply not good enough and should not be tolerated. And the fact is, there should be a reporting mechanism in it, because in my opinion, I don't care what you do, where you're from. If you come to Cayman and you're on the side of the road and making young girls and women feel uncomfortable to just walk down the street, you don't have a place in our society. That work permit should be revoked and you should be sent back. Let's face it, Sandra, that piece of life isn't something that we used to have a lot of in Cayman when it came to this overt whistling and shouting and harassing women as they just walk down the road. That's not something that Caymanian men used to do. And certainly it has been something that has really, really, really hit a nerve for me, because I think it was 2 different times that my daughters came home and told me they were simply out on the road walking. And this is what they were exposed to. Now, of course, in one instance, there was a car that was driving by. And in the other instance, she didn't know who it was and she felt unsafe. So she just kept walking. That should not be tolerated. It cannot be tolerated. And I can tell you personally, I believe we need to be very, very firm and very strict about how we govern our community. And for too long, Caymanians have made all the sacrifices in the name of economic growth. We cannot continue to have this type of foolishness, to have this type of behaviors carried out in public.
Very good. And finally, they were referring to a post that was written by Ms. Nikiva Bush, admonishing the Caymanian people for demonstrating against the indigo divers, asking in relation to that, how do you feel about that admonishment?
I went out to the demonstration. I did 2 different interviews. I think that should answer that question quite quickly and plainly. I'll repeat myself. Any person who comes to Cayman, any person who goes to another country and then enjoys the right to reside there, to live and work there, and live and work there permanently, ought to respect the country that they're going to. That didn't happen. But for me, what was even worse was the blackface. Because for me, anyone who in this day and age is willing, A, to dress up like that, and 2, to put it on blast on social media that anyone can go and see, in my mind, is a person that we don't want to be building as or having as a permanent member of our community as we continue to build, the Cayman that we want our children to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's transition now into, further discussion on your previous tenure as Minister of Education.
Sure. I mean, Sandra, one of the things that I did mention in the first interview was that I took a decision very early on after the school tours that early childhood care and education, the foundation years, had to be our priority. And so in doing that, what I did was I launched a restructured and a fully staffed early childhood care and education unit. In the past, we simply had a single officer in the ministry, who actually in the department who among other things also oversaw that area. What I did was I ensured that we put together an entire unit. And what that unit did was they went out and got best practice from around the world to come up with what would be our early childhood care and education curriculum. Because we rolled out new reception classes at 4 different schools. 3 classes at Sir John A. Cumber Primary, 3 classes at Savannah Primary, 1 in Bordentown, 1 in Georgetown Primary. Because those schools, due to running out of space, were no longer offering reception. And so because our teachers were complaining that our children were coming to school, and as I said in the previous interview, they had to spend the first term and a half just getting them ready to learn. It was important to get reception back at our biggest primary schools. And so once we did that, we also raised the minimum age. We raised the minimum age to 4 years old, so that by the time you got to primary 1, you were much closer in matching what the UK's primary school entry age was. And that's a key, Sandra, because
Right.
it's a huge difference. All of us who are parents will remember quite clearly, or if you don't, just think about it. That difference between a child being 4 and 4 and 9 months, 5 and 9 months, the amount of exponential growth that we go through as humans between the age of 2 and 6. They say that those 4 years exponentially is the most rapid growth in humans. And so if that's the case, and research have proven that, it made sense then that wound up being the real focus and real priority. And in fact, Sandra, back in May of 2011, we also had the very first Parents Education and Information Fair, where we brought parents in so that they could see what the Learn Through Play curriculum was going to be like. Because I knew that was going to be very different. Because a lot of parents have been used to this idea that you line students up, you put them at desks, and you line them up in a row in desks, and that's how you teach them. Whereas research have proven children at very early ages learn much better through play. And so because they're able to use various tools around them, let me use a classic example. A lot of times a teacher's simply taking a jug of water that is labeled 1 through 5, filling it to 5, pouring it down to the number 4, and that equating to 5 minus 1 equaling 4 is so much easier for a child to learn by simply looking and observing. And that's just a simplistic example of what learning through play is, but that's what a learning through play curriculum was. And to be honest, it was rolled out extremely successfully.
Yeah. And I must say, as parents, those of us who are, a little bit entrenched in education, that's the model that the Montessori schools use.
Absolutely.
And, they are renowned worldwide for utilizing that model successfully, well into even the high school years. Children and young people learn by doing. There is some degree of observation obviously involved, but this concept of regurgitation is the lowest form of learning. So, when we used to sit back and do our timetables, or 1 + 1 = 2, a lot of parents still think that you teach children through repetition. And that is on the totem pole of how best to teach children. That's all the way down to the on the bottom, it's really not the most effective method.
That's right. So
and
we were moving away from that rote memorization, lining children up, and you try to hammer it into their heads, memorize this, memorize this, memorize this, and then at the end of it, parents clapping and feeling like their children are learning, whereas really all they're doing at that point is demonstrating that they have a good memory. The next thing we did, Sandra, was we realized that we had a huge issue as it related to all of the child daycare centers. And so we then offered free training. And so the unit, because we had built a properly staffed unit, what they did was, for free, they went out into every child care center and introduced what learning through play looked like. They held workshops to try and ensure that those persons in those institutions who were coming in contact with children from a very early age were being taught themselves what good practice should look like, what it is that we should be trying to do with our children. Because Sandra, let's face it, in today's world, most parents, once a child is born, typically can only take the mandatory leave, parental leave, that's allowed under the law, and then they have to go back to work.
Right.
And so a lot of times when you have to go back to work, a lot of parents want to leave their children in some form of center and be able to have them start to be cared for and start to learn. And this, for me, was a key initiative, was getting out to the centers and ensuring that we were supporting them. Because in supporting them, in supporting our children, we were getting children who were much, much more ready to learn when they got to primary one. And so, Sandra, setting that foundation was extremely important for us as a team, as a ministry. And I can say that through the task force, through the early years unit, through the response from parents and response from teachers, what we were able to do was we developed a system and a program that is still in schools today. And lastly, Sandra, we also had to do quite a bit of retraining for a lot of our teachers, because a lot of our early years teachers didn't use the learning through play approach or curriculum. Now, some of them did it as part of their own classroom practice because it made sense for them to do, but having it be the actual curriculum that we were going to roll out, we needed to ensure that all of our teachers, and so in the system alone, we were able to train up 83 of our practitioners and ensure that they were actually ready. And so that then led to the successful implementation and rollout of what was our expanded and improved early childhood care and education system. And so, Sandra, if we could transition there from there.
And you know, I want to say that I know last time you mentioned having gone to Russia, for example, at the conference. I think that was the early childhood conference.
Yes.
That was attended by obviously representatives from all over the world. I think there were 3 members from the Cayman delegation.
Oh no, it was much more than 3 members. Oh no, myself, the chief officer. We took a senior school improvement officer from the ministry.
Okay.
We took 2 primary school practitioners, and I think there was one other person on the team, and I'm drawing a small blank, but the delegation in total to Russia, I think, was about 7 people in total from the system.
Okay.
So we wanted to ensure that everyone got on board, but it wasn't just myself and the chief officer and the chief education officer.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to just take the leaders to a program like that. You need to take people who are going to be part of the system.
Absolutely.
To that, because that then showed them that not only were they valued, but their input was valued, so that they could actually get and see for themselves what was being said at the conference. Mandatorily, we all visited early childhood centers in Russia. And so for them to actually see what a good early childhood care and education system looked like in practice. And I'll give you a small one, Sandra, that'll probably bring quite a bit of joy to your heart. So we go to this early childhood center in Moscow. And out in the playground, what they had done was they had taken many, many hallmarks from the community and put it in the playground itself. They had stop signs, so they were teaching their children how road safety.
Right.
They had mini sidewalks. They were teaching their children how they should behave when it came to walking along the road. So they interspersed what children were going to be exposed to in very, very short order, and just put it on as an ordinary part of the actual school layout. And so again, those are the sorts of things that you pick up when you go to those sort of conferences and you see best practice happening in world-class early childhood care and education centers.
Wow. And I mean, it obviously would have helped you to formulate the early years curriculum framework that your team would have been working at as well, and perhaps to tweak that a little bit more. It's so interesting when you were talking about the Russian experience and you gave that example, because the Japanese have a very, very interesting model where their citizens are respected all over the world for being so incredibly law-abiding and compliant and disciplined. Maybe discipline is the best word, right? Where they have personal discipline, and that then transforms into or translates into the entire community at large. At events like World Cup, they're going to be the ones who are going to clean up the stadium when other people leave it trashed, right? And of course, they do that by teaching very, very young children how to be independent-minded, how to do tasks and chores. Even in the classroom, they don't hire cleaners. Maybe they do, but during the day, they have the kids clean up after themselves, doing the sweeping, even cooking. You find very young kids in Japanese culture who can get in front of a stove and they know how to make some noodles and throw some fish and chicken in there, and they're able to help themselves, and it builds discipline and resilience that translates professionally and in later academic years as well. I always marvel at if we could do that more as Caribbean parents, as Caymanian parents, how much we would be advancing our children into, really productive members of the community and young adults.
That's right. And that's why, Sandra, one of the things that you saw that we started was we had put together a framework, and you're going to see this in my manifesto, where I am proposing to introduce a reception through school leaving, citizenship and learning curriculum. And so what does that mean? All that simply means is we're not going to be adding things on top of an already very cramped day for our students. It is interweaving all of the civics and citizenship type of responsibilities and roles, and you start it from a very early age and you make it very age appropriate, but it never stops as you go through school. Because what used to happen was we used to have some of that stuff happen maybe in primary, but by the time we got to high school, we were just so busy and so much about external exams that a lot of those things dropped off and we never really continued them. And so civics and citizenship, we're going to develop our own homemade curriculum that goes all the way through the very beginning of school to the very end. One of the things that you heard me mention in passing as well, I want to ensure that we bid out and get someone to actually write age appropriate civics, economic and political books that we would use in our schools. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to show my age here. In my day, it was Dick and Dora, and they had a dog. I think his name was Nip. Well, why in the world do we need to be reading about Dick and Dora when we're in primary one, when we should be reading something that is about tourism, something that is about my finance and me, our constitution and me? Make it all age appropriate, but very Caymanianized, so that as our children move through, and we know that they need to do all of these things as they go from primary 1, primary 2, primary 3, make it about Cayman, so that you're learning about Cayman while you're going through the mandatory primary years curriculum. And then as part of tutor group or homeroom, we would make sure that teachers have 15-minute sessions per day that is part of that time they spend with their students to move that bucket, move that forward, so that we never drop it. We never drop that ball, so that at that point you're learning much higher order things that is about our constitution,
Right.
is about financial services, it is about our economy, it is about things distinctly Caymanian, because we expect our children to come out of school with a lot of this knowledge, but we're not imparting it in school. And it's not going to happen at home.
Yeah, and that would help to build national pride as well.
Absolutely.
And to learn a bit more about our history and culture. So,
Well, I can tell you, I'm a firm believer that mandatorily, there's a few things that the US do that we can borrow. And I think mandatorily, every class, every year, at every school should start off by singing the Cayman national song before every day starts. Because I just think that's important. I think it's important to be proud to be Caymanian.
yes.
I think it's important for us to instill that national pride, because that then translates into us being very strong about our culture and not taking up other cultures so easily. And I'm not saying that we're not going to take up music, etc., from other places, but we need to be proud about who we are. Proud to be Caymanian.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on from the early childhood care and education, which obviously is and continues to be, as you say, extremely important to getting our young people off during this very, very formative first years. And let's talk about an area that oftentimes gets neglected, I'm sad to say, as a parent. And as someone who at one point, when I was pregnant with my own child, had concerns that, developmentally she was growing very, very slow. I shouldn't say slowly, but she was very, very small in the womb, and we didn't know what was causing it, what was going on.
Sure.
Special needs children. And we often hear special education needs being something that only those parents highlight, and unfortunately the larger community doesn't fully understand what that encompasses, and maybe it's easy for us to ignore this very, very vulnerable and delicate group. And as a result, sometimes they don't get the funding and the support that they so desperately need in the community.
Yeah. Sandra, on that point, one of my proudest achievements in my tenure was the rollout of the new approach that we used at the Lighthouse School, where we implemented the whole learning with the use of iPads and technology, and how that transformed teaching and learning for all the students there. Up until just Sunday, I had a parent call me because they had listened to the first interview, and they said, "Man, you need to talk about this more.
Yes.
I have 2 special needs children. I didn't realize that this started when you were a minister." And he thanked me. And I said to him, I said, "Listen, it's not about thanking me. It's about, you got to care. You got to have that strategic vision that you look and you say, if we're going to truly be student-centered, it can't just be high achievers. It can't just be, oh, well, let's find something to do for those who are making more and more trouble in school, and how do we deal with them?" While those 2 elements will be a part of school systems that we have to deal with, the silent and unforgotten a lot of times are persons with special education needs. And so one of the first things that we did was I introduced a brand new autism diagnostic services. And so we worked with one of the service providers in Cayman, and what we did was we actually paid for them to go overseas to actually become an autistic diagnostic center, but also an autistic diagnostic training center. And so what they were able to do was they were able to work closely with teachers, so that teachers were able to pick up on cues a whole lot quicker.
Oh, wow.
And much easier, so that we could
Yes.
then ensure that at the very early years we were
Yep.
diagnosing and identifying children.
Yep.
Because I was hearing horror stories that children were reaching primary 6. Sandra, you reach primary 6, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And that's when you then get sent to Lighthouse School.
Oh,
That's
my gosh.
completely inappropriate. That means that
Yes.
child's life chances has already been dashed, right? And so I'll give you one simple example of how that policy turned out in reality. We introduced a transition class for year 1 students who would have otherwise required their special education needs to be met at Lighthouse. 8 children. 8 children were assigned. 6 were transitioned successfully back into mainstream school in the school year 2012-2013. What does that mean? That means we were right under identifying the students, but because of the testing and monitoring system that was in place, we were able to then make sure that their education needs were being met at the right school, the right institution. The other thing that was absolutely brand new to me, Sandra, because again, I came to this as a CPA, not as a teacher.
Right.
Music therapy. I love music.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of us that absolutely love music.
Yeah.
And music is therapeutic in my life. There are lots and lots of times where I'm driving, I'll put the phone on silent and I'll just turn on some music because I'm in between meetings, I'm heading to pick up my daughter from school, I'm heading to pick up my son from school, I'm doing whatever.
Yeah.
And I just want some music on just to relax my mind.
Right.
And so we were able to roll out at Lighthouse, the Early Intervention Program, and the Sunrise Adult Training Center, a highly successful music therapy program where music therapy was taken to every one of those organizations, and the professionals were able to work closely with the music therapist and ensure that all the students who were going to benefit were enrolled and were part of that program. Until this day, I still get goosebumps, and one of the proudest things that I've ever been a part of was going to the first Christmas music concert that was put on, and to see children and young people who I had seen during my visit to Lighthouse, to see them now confidently get up and actually meaningfully participate in a Christmas music concert. I was just blown away at how they had grown by leaps and bounds, the confidence they showed.
Right.
And what it then did was all of the teachers' behavior improved 100%. Their capacity to actually just concentrate improved dramatically. And of course, just their school experience improved. And so again, another key area that we used, or key tool that we used to ensure that those who are on our special education needs spectrum were met with services that would have a positive impact in their lives. Now, as I understand it, we are still not where we should be as it relates to speech and language therapists and getting enough interventionists in our program. I don't have all the data on that, but what I can say is the next administration is going to have to look at that, because that has to be priority funding. It has to be priority funding, because if we don't take care of our most vulnerable, Sandra, what does that say for us?
Exactly.
One thing that I want to laud that was started and is continued to really be built has been the vocation training program at the Sunrise Adult Training Center. And so I want to give those staff a special shout out, because they continue to get positive response to job placement.
Yep.
What I am going to ask more and more, especially larger businesses, reach out to them. They still have students that they need to place. I say larger institutions. Typically larger institutions can incorporate persons with special needs a lot more.
Right.
Because they're able to offset some of the challenges they face with other employees.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, if you're going to do it, don't do it just for the PR. Do it because you really care for people, because a lot of times you're going to have to put in place special provisions to ensure that your staff, your other staff, are sensitized to their special needs. But Sandra,
and just a couple weeks ago, we saw a placement with the post office, I believe it was.
That's right.
With Sunrise. So, it works, and it gives these young people, who are part of the Sunrise community, a purpose. And that's so important for everyone, I think. Yeah.
And what else are we going to do? Are we simply going to say, you know what? Let's have them stay at home, and government through the financial aid department simply just give them money? No, make them for those that can actually be functioning in a workplace. Let's make sure we get them out there.
Absolutely.
Because it's so much more fulfilling for them and for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. And I'd like to see, I mean, maybe you can add this to your list if you get the ministry again, art therapy as well, because music and art go hand in hand. My 8-year-old, she loves to draw, and her teacher always says, wow, she's like a little artist. She really loves to, and she expresses herself a lot of times emotionally through her drawing. So sometimes she can't use her words for whatever reason. Communication isn't easy for a lot of kids. And so if she's feeling sad, she'll draw a picture with me and her, and she has a little sad face on. And then I go, okay, that then allows me to open up the conversation to try to find out why are you sad in this picture? What's going on? So it's so incredibly amazing to see them be expressive through music and art as well. So, everybody can have access to art. You got a piece of paper and a few pencils or crayons, and you're off and running. So that's wonderful.
Well, Sandra, and I must give, again, Lighthouse a special shout out, because I was proud to say that during my time, now this one wound up being a happy coincidence, I will quickly admit, but we had our first students come out of Lighthouse get an O-level, and it was in art, and it was because of the art therapy classes that they did offer there. And so that is something that has been a part of their programming for a number of years. So you're quite right.
One of the things I'm a little bit sad about when you talk about the special education needs, and there was a facility there at this school on Walker's Road, which would have been the old campus. I think SciFec was on part of the campus, and then the special education needs unit was also there. They've been displaced, obviously, because of construction and so on with the facility. But they've also had funding cut for these types of intervention programs and special needs programs, because the government has reallocated funding to build a school in Cayman Brac. Now, I know that this is a hot topic in terms of education, but it would be remiss of me to not put it to you. What are your thoughts about this Cayman Brac school project?
Well, personally, I cannot see how $50 million can be spent on a single high school on Cayman Brac. I just can't see it. I don't believe that that's wise use of public money. I think that we have to really, and this is a wider conversation for the next administration, and that is, how is it that we go about government projects? Sandra, we went from one end of the spectrum where there was people who said there was too much political involvement, 25 years ago, to now an overly prescriptive tick box system that really, as I have seen it, and in my opinion, have driven up the cost of projects purely because of how the system actually works. And to me, one of the things that we need to get back to doing is using a common sense approach. If we need a building X, and it can be a school, because all you have to do is list out what are your criteria, what are the number of classrooms, what are the number of specialty rooms, and you say what's entailed in them, and you actually bid out and competitively get bids in for the construction of government facilities. Because I can tell you, a lot of people out there in the development world continually criticizes government, not just in Cayman, but Cayman is who we have to talk about, at the cost of bringing buildings and assets to use, where they know that if they had to build that on their own as a private sector developer, they could do it for much cheaper, right? We have large groups in Cayman, like the NCB group, etc., that have built, buildings, commercial buildings, etc., in Cayman for years and do an exceptional job. Why is it that government continues to go out and bid things in a very old tick box sort of way versus trying to get true value for money? Now, you have to put the right belts and braces around it. I acknowledge that.
Yes.
But we have to do a much better job at bringing down the cost
Yeah.
of delivering assets,
Yeah.
in particular buildings, for the Cayman Islands government.
And I mean, we see Island Primary, which is recently opened, can accommodate more students. Very nice, modern educational facility that was constructed for a fraction of the cost. So it really is shocking when we see this type of a massive project, and to know that funds that could have helped other areas of education, including special needs children, have been reallocated in order to do this, what I have termed a vanity projects. I think ultimately that's what it is so incredibly unfortunate. All right, let's move on to talk a bit now about trying to really enhance skills for workplace readiness. And I know not only are you recapping what you've already done, including things like the Passport to Success program. That was another thing that I had no idea was launched during your tenure, which is really aimed at bridging gaps for young people 17 to 20, whatever barriers they may have to unemployment, trying to help those individuals. Relatively successful program with an 89% at the time completion rate, 59% of participants actually gaining employment, and 18% attending school, as well as a further, number of individuals that have since gone on to do the subsequent cohorts of that program.
Right.
But there's more, and you've got some ideas of how to build on when it comes to TVET, to build on the success of our people. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So when I said character and citizenship education, one of the things that I made very, very clear was that the principles of Passport to Success needs to form part of the high school character and citizenship education curriculum, because we need to ensure that everyone that's coming through the system was getting the right attitude. It's so cliche-ish to say your attitude determines your altitude. We all know this, yet we have done so little about it. Passport to Success remains one of my real pride and joys. I can remember if there was ever one program that I rolled out that I got a lot of resistance initially from the ministry team. I got a lot of resistance, and I got a lot of resistance around the stipend that they were paid. And I was very, very firm on this. And I said, no, if participants are going to go through it, it has to feel like work. It has to feel like they're not just showing up because government has this quote-unquote free program for them. No, it's showing up because their quote-unquote job that day was to show up nicely dressed, to be able to learn and gain those very critical skills that wouldn't just land them a job, that was going to keep them employed. And that was our biggest success when it came to Passport to Success. Now, if we're going to transition slightly to TVET. Sandra, we've had a very vexing conversation / issue for years, but people haven't talked about it in the way that it actually really is. And in fact, I saw a video by a prominent business owner just the other day, and he had a rant about TVET and the fact that we didn't have TVET in school. What we've been talking about, Sandra, quite simply is streaming.
Right.
At what age, at what stage in the education journey do we stream people from mainstream education and guide them toward technical and vocational learning? Now, I personally believe that if we're going to continue, and we are, having the British education system as our system, we need to follow all of the developments in that system. And so one of the strategies and one of the policies rather that I'm going to propose in my manifesto, and certainly for the next administration, is that we clearly define what is formal school leaving and education leaving age. And so I made the point that SciFEC was supposed to be the crossroads, as it were. You do it at the end of formal school leaving, but you're giving that important second chance for resets. Anyone who managed to pass enough of their resets went back on what we consider the traditional university path. For those who don't, we would then expand the criteria for education leaving age, and the education leaving age we moved to 18. We need to get to the point where we accept as a community that no one should be finished legally with their education before the age of 18. And we need to stop pussyfooting around about it, and we need to stop playing political football with our education system.
Right.
The education leaving age should be 18 years old. Now, for anyone who's moved on and gone to university, that qualifies. They simply have to be registered in the system as attending full-time tertiary education. For those who've gone on to a sixth form college, again, they would be registered in the system at sixth form. But what about our other students? What about those other participants in SciFec? What we should be doing with them is tying them up with the private sector and mandatorily requiring all of those students to get a placement. If you cannot put Caymanians in a placement to be trained at SciFec, work for let's say 3 to 4 days or 3 to 4 hours a day, and the rest of your day spent at a workplace, in my opinion, you shouldn't get a trade and business license, and you shouldn't get access to a work permit. It needs to be mandatory, Sandra. We need to stop pussyfooting around with this issue of how we transition Caymanians with, and upskill, continue to upskill our Caymanians to become productive and efficient members of the labor force. That's how we're going to rebuild our middle class. That's how we're going to rebuild a middle class that has been decimated in this country, because way too many Caymanians are pushed out of the labor market, can't get back into the labor market, and what are they replaced with? Work permit holders.
Right.
Sandra, we have to have a new approach, and the new approach has got to be tied legally to our education system, where we amend the education law that the education leaving age be moved to 18, and that every person has to participate in a formal learning environment to be compliant. Otherwise, you'll be truant. Otherwise, at that point, you're breaking the law.
Right.
Why is it that just about every other country in the world have accepted that 18 should be the minimum age that a human being should have to exit the education system? And Cayman, we're still at some children at 16, some 17 plus. No, we need to do better. We need to do better by our children. And if we do that and we build out the SciFec programming, if we build out programs like the Superior Auto Training Program, if we build out things that are happening up at the institution, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, institutions can then register, can apply to either have their programming registered with the Department of Education. I also believe, I've said this the other day, I don't believe that government should necessarily provide all the programming at SciFec. I think if Sandra has a great server, bartender program that is holistic, and she applies and comes to government and says, hey, I would love to have this as part of the curriculum that leads, that Caymanians can use to still qualify to be within the education leaving age. But I don't have a school, I don't have an institution, I can't go and spend money to rent. That you can then be given 1 or 2 classrooms at SciFec, and if that's what Caymanians want to do, that would be what they would be doing for, let's say, the morning hours, and in the evening hours, going to a restaurant, going to a hotel, restaurant or bar, and making sure that they're then getting the on-the-job training. Sandra, none of this is out of the reach of Caymanians and us as a community. We can do it, but we have to have an administration that is going to be committed to doing it.
Yes.
We have to have the commitment that 18 years old must be the new education leaving age, and we must put it in legislation, and we must be very, very firm with employers that this isn't, we're not showing up anymore to ask people to participate. If you want to have a trade and business license, if you want to trade and operate, if you want to have access to work permits, here's what you have to do. And by the way, you have to then show a record of keeping Caymanians employed. Because if we don't do that, we know that there are a lot of other bad things can happen. But I'm going to use that as a tease, because one of our future programs, I want to talk about the 5-planked approach that I want to have for education. But it's going to tie back to this, Sandra. Now, let's get back to streaming. Once a child reaches this age and goes on one of these programs, they are then able to have that all-important piece of paper. So let's just use bartending as a classic example. So a child gets a SciFac, they didn't pass math or English, they reset it, they still don't pass it, and they then say, well, you know what? I kind of like the idea of being a bartender. I kind of like the idea that, I'm going to work, at the Ritz or wherever, and I'm going to work typically from, late afternoon until late hours, because I'm in my late teens at that point, and this is a good way, and we know you can make a lot of good money and build a very, very solid life doing this. Once they have moved through the program, it is only when they reach the very end that legally, they are then out of school, as it were, that they've completed their education leaving age, and then they continue to be tracked through what I'm going to be proposing, which is a national manpower database, so that we know who is participating in our economy. The other thing that needs to be brought to the fore, I had proposed a draft national qualifications framework. And what that is, Sandra, is, and I welcome people out there, just go ahead and Google NQFs that's used in other countries. What it does is it takes every type of qualification that's available in a country, and it actually ranks it and puts it in a framework. And so certificate programs, so you start with high school leaver, then you get certificate programs. And let's just say your certification, I'm going to be harping on let's just say it's on plumbing, right? And so you then would be able to know, if you are a journeyman plumber, where that sits on the NQF. What's more important is it would take a person, and let's just say that you graduated high school, you haven't gone and gotten any tertiary education, but you've worked 10 years in the private sector, and you've worked your way up to supervisor at a hedge fund administration shop. It would then equate you. It would then tell you what you're equal to. And that, with 10 years experience, that may mean that you're equal to having an associate's degree, or you're equal to having a bachelor's degree. What it does is it takes all of the formal qualifications to start with, but then it takes all of life experiences and actually puts it on a framework, so that Caymanians are no longer going to be told by an employer, oh, well, despite the fact that you've worked for 15 years, you still can't be paid as much as someone who has a bachelor's degree. Because if the NQF says, look, that's equal to a bachelor's degree from a national qualification framework, people will know where they stand, and it's a much easier journey for them when it comes to on the workplace, or if they're moving between jobs. So let me be very clear, Sandra. This is not something that would be government dominated or government run. The National Qualification Framework Council whilst it would have ministry representation on there, it would be dominated by private sector participants. The ministry is there to police them and ensure that everything is being done to international best practice standards. But you need to have our local industry involved, because it is them that is going to be able to say, in the Cayman context, if you've worked in a bank for X number of years, yes, this is what it means. And once you do that, you can publish it. People will be able to use it. Employers will be able to use it as well. And it just leads to us again being able to attack that whole degradation of the middle class in Cayman, where we're ensuring that not everyone, those people who don't have a degree. Those people who are not a qualified lawyer or have gone back and become an engineer, but have worked at a construction firm and they've made their way up to become a site superintendent, but don't have any formal qualifications. They then can look at the NQF and bargain with their employer to say, well, look, it's you all that had the input. It's you that have agreed that under our Cayman, and this has to be authentically Caymanian and built for our economy. Hence the reason you'd have industry guidance on what leads to specific types of NQF leveling, as it's called. Sandra, I can't tell you how important that is for any economy, especially ours and the stage of development we're at.
Right.
Sandra, we got to be doing what we have to do to ensure that Caymanians are put in a place that they're not taken advantage of, that they're not pushed aside in the workplace.
Absolutely. Now, the last time we spoke, Rolston, one of the questions that came up was in relation to why a middle school system was taken out of place. And you, I think, adequately addressed the reasoning why it was really to put it in alignment with what the UK system does. So at some point, it used to be that way. Then they changed it, introduced a middle school, which is more like the American model. And then during your administration, it was put back. Now, you've actually gone back and did some research. And I want to really thank you for being someone who is data and research driven, because I always say this on my program. I call it the triple D, right? Data driven decisions have got to be how we move forward in this country. We can't just be making decisions on a whim, on, you know, political feelings, on personal feelings, and all this other stuff. We should have, that's why the ESO is there. They collate and collect data for us to try to make decisions. We see more and more that the Health Ministry and Wellness, they did a big survey this past year trying to find out some key markers of, taking the pulse of our community to see where we are in terms of our health.
Right.
You know, because it's so significant. How many of us are diabetic? How many of us are pre-diabetic? How many of us have insulin resistance? Because then policies, everything from, medical insurance policies straight down the line can be outfitted around that information. So you went away and you brought your laptop with you and you're prepared to really demonstrate and explain to us here today what it is. And of course, we don't necessarily have to look at your screen, but for the benefit of our listeners, I'm just kind of, and people viewing this.
Yeah, it'll be difficult to pick up the screen, but I was showing it to you earlier, Sandra, because you had gone through the American system.
Right,
and I know that
that's
you
right.
always had this as a question in your mind.
Absolutely.
Because you were very used to that being
Yep.
a part of the system you would have went through. And so, Sandra, as I was explaining earlier in our first interview, the key is not about what we call schools, because here's a fact.
Right.
No one can tell me that at the end of primary, when you're about 10, 11 years old, that you're not equally able to bully a 5-year-old who's on the same campus as you, as someone who's 16 bullying an 11-year-old.
Right.
So what are we going to do? Have a school for every year?
Yeah.
And to segregate our children just so that every year is separate? No. What we have to ensure is that we put in place school management systems that are going to hold teachers accountable, but it's actually going to allow them, just through the way in which we manage our schools, that we limit or lower the opportunity for bullying and poor behavior. Now, let's start with the bedrock. The bedrock is going to be a mandatory citizenship curriculum throughout school, which will cover things like bullying, why it's inappropriate, why it's bad, why it's just absolutely bad and inappropriate, and desensitizing children to stop those sorts of behaviors, root out those sort of behaviors in those schools. But we know it's still going to happen.
Right.
We know there's still going to be some of it. And so what is critical is that when it comes to high school, that we have teachers in particular ahead of middle years. And so what their responsibility would be, and I would propose that we have a female for girls and obviously a male for boys. And their responsibility is purely nothing about teaching and learning. It is all about the safety and wellness of students that fall in that age bracket. And they and their principal need to come up with novel ideas. Do we have a system where the children who fall in that age group have a different lunchtime than the older children?
Right.
Do we ensure that we take all of our children and we actually bring them all together?
Yeah.
And we're actually pounding it into their heads.
Yeah.
Look, there's no room in our schools for bullying. And we have stiff consequences, because that's the other thing that we have to be mindful of. In the age back in my days, you got a strapping. I'll put my hand up and say, not for bullying, but I got strapped. Right? I was a typical Caymanian boy going through the system who, stayed and played football when the bell had rung and didn't go back to class. So we know how the system was. It doesn't that way anymore. Lots of things have been banned and are not part of the school system. But we have to put in the management and structures that cause our teachers to be able to manage students and care for them in an age-appropriate way. And so right now in the UK, for example, the traditional system is primary and then you go to secondary. But there are some schools in different areas that have taken primary and secondary and identified what are the middle years, and they ensure that the staff at the primary school level and staff at the high school level manage those students in differing ways, because then that causes them to be better behaved and less apt to bully other students. And so I just don't believe that we should introduce systems, and in particular a brand new school, and the cost that goes with a new school, the costs that go with that, having to be taught by a differing body of students, when we can do what they're doing in the UK. As far as I'm concerned, Sandra, I cannot accept that we in Cayman can't manage schools as it's intended, and it's being done in the UK and other Caribbean countries who follow the British curriculum.
And
I just think that's us being defeative to say that we're not good enough to conduct.
Or we don't have enough discipline in our own children.
Yeah.
So just to kind of go through what you brought here, this was an actual list of schools in the UK to demonstrate to us how they're structured.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so and it's by year, by age, and it's simply saying how you actually structure how the schools themselves govern their students, right? Now, one of the things that I can tell you, and is going to be in my manifesto, is going to be that we are going to move back to having a mandatory end of primary, standardized examination. I can remember in my days, it used to be called the National Achievement Test. And I can tell you that I believe with all my heart that results in the government schools, generally speaking, dropped when we disbanded the National Achievement Test and simply introduced a middle school, thinking that was going to be the way we caught students who were underachieving in primary to get them, quote unquote, caught up. The other thing that I'm going to be proposing is summer school. Sandra, we need summer school. My fellow Caymanians, all of us, we need summer school. If children leave school in July and the teachers can tell you that they're below where they should be, how do we expect that come September, after having taken a 10 to 12 week break from school, that all of a sudden they're going to show back up in September and be able to be caught up? We have to provide summer school for our students. Summer school has to be a key part of our way forward. We got to be finding ways to support our Caymanian students. Our system shouldn't be about parents. It shouldn't be about teachers. And with no disrespect, our system is supposed to be student-centered. Everything we do in education should be about what is going to give our students the best possibility for their best possible outcome. And I think summer school is going to have to be a key part of it. We trialed summer school at one of the primary schools during my first term, but I was not returned to office, so again, that was never continued or taken forward. But you know that that's a key part of the American system. And that's why I said to you, Sandra, it's not that I'm against things that are in the American system. I think summer school is a good element of other school systems that can be introduced to the British system without disrupting the entire system. Because parents and students should have the right to know where are they operating versus where the curriculum expects them to perform at the end of every single year of their education journey. Because it's no use telling parents in year 9 and 10, oh, your son or daughter isn't achieving up to standard, and therefore their outcomes are going to be greatly diminished. That should be something that's known and communicated to parents at every stage of their education journey, and we do everything we can to help those students who are struggling for whatever reason and are behind for whatever reason to catch up.
Well, Rolston, I can tell you, if you got this ministry, you definitely have your work cut out for you. We want to thank you again for going through some additional, and there was much more, of course, that's on this list of achievements. Will you be publishing this anywhere? I know you've made mention of your manifesto. Do you have a website that has launched as yet that people can go to?
The website will be launched hopefully next week. And these achievements, listen, I'm proud of my time in the ministry. This is going to be an addendum to the manifesto.
Okay. All right. Very good. And I'm glad to see that you've come prepared with innovative solutions going forward for how we can continue to prioritize education and really try to prepare our children for the world that we live in.
That's right.
This is it now, right?
We're not going to rebuild our middle class with a second-rate education system.
Absolutely.
Public education must be the great social equalizer that allows Caymanians to fully participate in the economy, and for us to rebuild a middle class that has been decimated over the last 3 decades.
And as a product, not here in Cayman, but in the States, a product of public education myself, I can tell you, even at the university level, how important it is. It is a game changer.
That's right.
I grew up typical poor Caymanian child from Georgetown, no expectations, no real hopes of going off to university, and having been removed from that environment, given the opportunity to excel academically, it opened a whole new world of possibilities for me that, I can't imagine what my life would be like if that hadn't happened. So I have always advocated and supported for education first. And I'm really happy to see that, that's your position as well.
Yeah. No, I thank God that I had parents and I had a father who traveled as a seaman, but he quickly realized out on those ships, my mother quickly realized cleaning homes and cleaning office buildings, if our children don't get a proper education, they're going to be in the same position as we are. And so they push that not just as something to do, but as a way out, as a way forward. And so I thank God that I was born in that type of environment, and I took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of me, including breakdancing and playing football. But whilst I did all those things in school, I also made sure that I kept up with the books, because my parents had one deal with me. They said, Rolly, you can do. We're not going to stop you from all of this, because breakdancing was pretty new to Cayman in the 1980s, right? So my parents found it a little strange, this stuff that I was doing, but they had 3 rules: no drugs, keep up your schoolwork, and you can have that fun if that's how you want to have fun, and that's what I did. And it was about a great public education system that fostered and gave me those opportunities, but I had to take advantage of them, and I had to work hard. And that's the message for our children. There's no free lunch. You got to work hard, but we need to better structure the system to support them.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. I'm trying to imagine you breakdancing. I can't quite see it, but
just imagine
we'll perhaps
80 pounds lighter.
Yeah, not as bad as that woman in the Olympics, hopefully.
Oh no. Anyone that knew me, and anyone that listens to this, who remembers me, class 88, will tell you that no, we did proper breakdancing.
Okay, all right.
Proper popping, your ground routine.
Okay.
Oh
wow.
no, proper breakdancing.
I hear you. All right. Well, thanks again for sitting down with us. We know, of course, that you'll be joining us on the live stream. People get an opportunity, hopefully, to ask you more questions, and you can talk more about your vision and why you think that you're the best candidate for West Bay North.
Thank you.